Eliza, we appreciate everything you've done, but starting today, your position is no longer needed.
And just like that, years of loyalty meant nothing. But if he thought I'd walk away quietly, he didn't know me at all. I saved this company 3 times. He couldn't even give me a raise. 6 months ago, I was the only one who noticed the algorithm bug. No one cared until it nearly flushed $3 million into the wrong accounts. No headlines, no trophies, just me, a stale granola bar, and 36 hours of uninterrupted screen time. I fixed it, submitted the report, and moved on, just like I did with the cybersecurity breach last spring and the social media meltdown last winter, when a junior marketer posted a draft tweet calling our own product a glorified spreadsheet. I saved this company 3 times, and today I sat at my desk watching a 27-year-old project lead get flowers for launching a dashboard. It was a Wednesday. Minneapolis was grey and wet, the kind of day that clings to your skin. I'd arrived early like I always did, stopping by the corner cafe for my usual black coffee, 2 sugars, and silence. I didn't even have to order anymore. The barista, a kid named Jeremy, just handed it over with a grin, still running the show behind the scenes. "Miss Monroe?" he asked. I smiled politely, something like that. Back at Allied Titan, the elevators were crowded with half-smiles and carefully worded compliments. Quarterly reviews brought out the politician in everyone. There was always a memo circulating about growth opportunities and cross-functional alignment. In my experience, those were just warm-up phrases for you're being replaced. My cubicle hadn't changed in a decade. Family photo from 2007. A succulent that died months ago but still sat in its pot. Folders color-coded by crisis type. And a single post-it on my monitor. Don't ever let them make you smaller than your competence. At 9:46. Me. Lena Patel walked by, holding a clipboard so tight her knuckles turned white. She nodded at me. I nodded back. She looked like she wanted to say something, but thought better of it. My review was at 10:15. I checked my notes again. I had supporting documentation for every project I led, every initiative I saved. I even printed a graph comparing incident costs with and without my interventions. Conservative estimate, I'd saved the company $4 million in the last 3 years. When Lena called me in, Brandon was already seated behind his desk, lit by the soft glow of 2 monitors and a minimalist desk lamp that probably cost more than my chair. "Eliza," he said, not bothering to stand. "Please." I sat. He wore a slate grey suit, crisp white shirt, no tie, a calculated balance between power and approachability. His expression was polite, detached, like someone reading a menu for a restaurant he didn't plan on ordering from. "I'll get right to it," he said. "You've been with Allied Titan for what? 18 years, 19 in December," I replied. He nodded like that was a liability. "We deeply appreciate your loyalty. Your institutional knowledge is unparalleled." "Thank you," I said, and waited. "Your reports are excellent. Your response times during high-pressure incidents are exceptional. That algorithm patch in March, flawless. You're reliable, thorough, and consistent." He paused. I felt it coming. "The pivot, however," he said, "as we transition into a more innovation-driven model, we're prioritizing roles that align with future-facing digital leadership, agile thinking, bold execution. I've led 3 major recoveries in 18 months," I said, calmly, while others brainstormed branding ideas. He smiled, like a parent humoring a child. "We're not questioning your value. We're just acknowledging that the direction we're moving in requires different strengths, younger strengths. Eliza, more photogenic strengths." I leaned forward, "or strengths that cost half as much and don't ask questions." He blinked. I let the silence hang, then pulled out a printed sheet from my folder and placed it on his desk. "This is a breakdown of the financial impact of the last 3 crises. I resolved each of them, quietly, without PR blowback or customer loss, and I documented every dollar." He glanced at the sheet, then, without looking at me, slid it gently back across the desk. "You're solid, Eliza, but the company's moving in a different direction." There it was. He didn't say raise, didn't say promotion, didn't even offer a title change. Just that rehearsed corporate script, smoothed out by HR-approved phrases, and a future he clearly didn't see me in. "I see," I said. "Thank you for the feedback." He stood then, suddenly full of time. "We'll revisit in Q1. Maybe shift your role into something more strategic. Advisory, perhaps. Translation: we're phasing you out. I stood too, looked him in the eyes and smiled. Not the kind of smile that asked for anything. The kind that promised I'd remember. Outside his office, Lena stood near the corner printer. She met my eyes for a second too long. She knew. She'd seen this play out before. I walked past her, past the flowers still sitting on the intern's desk, past the photo shoot happening in the lounge for the company newsletter. I walked out of that room quietly, but something in me had changed. I didn't say anything for weeks, but I started watching more carefully. The thing about being overlooked is you start noticing everything. That's the funny irony. When they stop seeing you, you finally see them. After the Raise meeting, I returned to my cubicle like always. I completed every assignment, attended every meeting, replied to every email within 3 minutes. I smiled when spoken to. I even said good idea to the new director of engagement when she suggested we add animated emojis to client reports. But inside, I was silent thunder. People thought I was licking my wounds. In reality, I was mapping the room. Who leaned forward when Brandon spoke? Who stayed behind after his meetings? Who nodded too quickly? Who didn't? Every silent moment became data. Every coffee run, every shift in the org chart, every new hire with a jawline and a vague title, I recorded it all. They had no idea that I was building something far more important than a quarterly dashboard. Then came Project Pulse, Brandon's pet initiative. He introduced it in a Tuesday all-hands, using phrases like future-ready workflows and ecosystem symbiosis. I sat in the back row, as usual, sipping burnt coffee from a chipped conference mug, and pretending not to notice that no one had reserved a seat beside me. Then I saw slide 9, clean blue and green diagram, timeline flow, contingency arrows. It was mine. I knew it instantly. I'd made it during a weekend crisis response 6 months ago. At the time, the platform had been bleeding users due to a faulty notification loop. While everyone panicked in Slack, I built the model, patched the system, and emailed a solution by Sunday night. Now here it was, rebranded. No citation, no mention, just Brandon speaking as if he'd drawn it on a napkin between lattes. I didn't react, not externally, but inside, something small snapped. It didn't make a sound, but I felt it. Later that evening, after most of the floor had emptied, I stayed behind to check the server logs. The building grew quieter with each passing hour. The glow of my monitor and the soft buzz of the vending machine down the hall were the only sounds left. I was still logged into the archive folder when I heard soft footsteps. Still here, a voice asked. It was Diego, early 20s, black hoodie under his badge-required lanyard, the kind of employee no one paid attention to until something broke. I nodded. I saw you open the recovery log, he said quietly. March folder. Right. I didn't respond. I backed it up. He added, the whole thing, slides, emails, system timestamps, everything, just in case. I turned in my chair. Why? He hesitated, then shrugged. Because it felt wrong, and because you're the only person who ever covered for me when the firewall rule went sideways. You remember that? Of course I do. He stepped forward and gently placed a flash drive on the edge of my keyboard. I didn't show anyone, he said, but I kept it, in case someone needed to know the truth. I looked at the drive, then at him. Thank you, Diego. He nodded once. They think you're done. That's why it's dangerous now. I stayed late that night. I reopened old project logs. I reviewed every crisis report. I started building a timeline, my timeline. Quiet fingerprints no one else could see. My work didn't have a name on it, but the pattern was mine. By midnight, I wasn't angry anymore. I was clear. At 7:15 the next morning, I called Howard Reese. Howard had once been CEO of Allied Titan. Before the digital rebranding, before the foosball table in the break room, before Brandon and his TED Talk voice, Howard had hired me when no one else would. He had built the company from late nights and bad coffee and instinct, and even after his retirement, I sent him a Christmas card every year, the kind with a photo of my dog and a handwritten note. We met at Beacon Roasters, his usual spot, at a little corner table that smelled like cedar and old books. He wore a grey overcoat and gloves. Even inside, a ceramic mug sat between us, steam curling gently above a saucer balanced with sugar packets. Eliza Monroe, he said, looking up with tired but steady eyes. I expected this call years ago. I didn't smile. Then you know why I'm here. I've heard whispers, he said. Too many whispers. You've held this place together longer than any of them realize. He took my work, I said flatly, passed it off as his own, then told me I didn't fit the new direction. Howard stirred his tea, one full rotation. Slow. You're not the first, but you might be the last, he said. Tell me what you want. Leverage, I replied, and a way to make it count. He leaned back in his chair. I still hold voting shares, so do a few other ghosts they think retired. Most are tired. Some are angry. None of them respect Brandon. And if those shares were reassigned, They'd listen to you, he said simply. They always did. He reached into his coat and pulled out a card. A lawyer's name, corporate restructuring specialist. She's quiet. She's smart. She's fast. We spoke for 20 minutes more. No fireworks, no raised voices, just two people who had spent their lives building something real, tired of watching others treat it like a playground. That night, back in my apartment, I cleared the table and spread out every annual report since 2010. I marked every name I recognized, every shareholder who might still remember what I did, everyone who owed me a phone call. I didn't know how long it would take, but I knew one thing for sure. That night, I started reading shareholder transfer law, and I didn't stop until dawn. Brandon thought I was done. I was just getting started. There's something liberating about being underestimated. It gives you room to move, room to breathe, room to plot. Brandon stopped calling on me in meetings. He shifted key projects to people who spoke in acronyms and wore sneakers with suits. I wasn't invited to innovation panels or strategy lunches. He assumed I was fading, drifting into the background like wallpaper in a conference room. No one used anymore. But he misunderstood me. I wasn't fading. I was focusing. Each morning, I still arrived early, coffee in hand. I still responded to emails with my usual speed and precision. I still fixed what others broke. But now I had another tab open on my screen, a quiet list of names, people who mattered, people who remembered. I started with the low-hanging fruit. Former employees turned passive shareholders. I reached out under the pretense of catching up, sometimes over coffee, sometimes by phone. I reminded them of the fires I'd helped extinguish, the weekends I'd worked, the results I'd delivered. And then, gently, I asked about their voting shares. You still holding on to them? I'd ask casually. Most of them weren't, or didn't care. One had been planning to sell to an external firm. Another hadn't checked their email from the company in 2 years. But once I explained what Brandon had done, how he was erasing legacy, gutting loyalty, they listened. And more than that, they agreed. The first signature came from Gerald Tran, a former VP of analytics, who'd moved to Arizona and now ran a vineyard. I don't drink tech anymore, he joked over the phone. But if you're trying to take back the ship, you've got my vote. The second came from Linda Morse, who'd once managed operations and still remembered my 2015 presentation that saved her job. These boys, she said, they think progress means forgetting everything that worked. You remind them what continuity looks like. By the end of October, I had quietly accumulated control or proxy rights for 12% of voting shares. It wasn't enough, but it was a start. I took a quiet breath and called Lawrence Wu, the corporate attorney Howard had referred me to. His office was in a discreet building downtown. No flashy signage, just a polished door and a brass nameplate. We met on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. The conference room smelled like leather and coffee beans. I need to establish a private holding entity, I said, sliding a folder across the table. Lawrence opened it, reviewed the share transfer documents, the agreements, the clauses about voting authority. He looked up. Do you want this entity to be visible to the board? No, I said. Not until I'm ready. He nodded. We can structure that. For the next 2 weeks, I worked late each night, poring over legal language and quietly filing paperwork. By day, I played the same role I always had, fixing bugs, smoothing over miscommunication, mentoring interns who never quite looked me in the eye. By night, I built leverage. One evening, as I was reviewing escrow clauses in the kitchenette, Lena walked in. She poured tea, didn't speak, then glanced over at my tablet. She froze for a second, then her voice dropped. That's not part of the Q4 report, she said. I looked up slowly. She didn't ask questions. She didn't smile. She just nodded once, slowly, and said, let me know if you need anything printed. I returned the nod. She walked out. Some people don't need explanations. They just need a reason. 3 days later, I received a message from a contact I hadn't spoken to in nearly a decade. Judith Carmichael. She was once our head of compliance, retired early, quiet, feared, brilliant. She had held her 15% stake in Allied Titan like a weapon, refusing to sell during every acquisition push. Brandon had reportedly tried to woo her with modernization incentives, but she'd ignored him completely. I heard you're stirring things, she said when I called. Good. Judith, I asked, do you still have your voting block? I do, she said. And it's just sitting there, waiting for someone who remembers what this company was before the jargon. I remember, I said. She was silent for a moment. Then, you'll have it. I sat in stunned silence for a full minute after we hung up. 15% from Judith, 12 I'd already secured. I was at 27%. It wasn't enough to overthrow a CEO, but it was enough to force a conversation, to demand a vote, to disrupt Brandon's carefully curated narrative. I filed the paperwork that same night. Lawrence reviewed and processed it in less than 48 hours. The next morning, I arrived at the office in a charcoal coat and flats, hair pulled back, no makeup, no flash. I nodded to the security guard, took the elevator alone, and as I reached the 18th floor, I caught my reflection in the glass. I didn't see someone they forgot. I saw someone they underestimated. I walked into my cubicle, powered on my screen, and opened the spreadsheet labeled Leverage, Phase 2, 12% down, 29 to go. By Thanksgiving, I held 26% of the company. No one had a clue. There's something poetic about carving a quiet rebellion beneath a veneer of routine. On the surface, I was the same Eliza, steady, early, polite. I still brought a Tupperware lunch. I still refilled the copy machine toner when no one else bothered. But underneath, I was calculating moves, brokering silence, and bending structure to my favor. By mid-November, the city had changed. Trees were bare, sidewalks salted, windows lit with holiday garlands. At Allied Titan, the office was humming with artificial cheer. Brandon hosted Gratitude Week, a series of team-building exercises and catered lunches. I received an unsigned thank you card with the words, "You are valuable," written in Comic Sans. I didn't attend the luncheons. Instead, I scheduled quiet meetings with the final pieces I needed. Judith Carmichael's 15% had pushed me over the halfway mark for a minority voting bloc, but I still needed presence and undeniable show of strength, someone the board couldn't ignore. That someone was Edward Marks. He was 72, a founding investor. He hadn't attended a board meeting in 4 years. Rumor had it, he now lived on a boat off the Florida coast and conducted most conversations through a satellite phone. It took 3 calls, a handwritten letter, and a reference from Howard Reese to finally reach him. "Eliza Monroe," he said through patchy audio, "weren't you the one who flagged the 2012 forecasting error before it hit the annual?" I replied. He let out a long whistle. "I made $3 million that year thanks to you. That's why I'm calling." I explained what had happened, how Brandon was spinning the company toward vanity metrics, how legacy staff were being silenced, how he'd passed off my work as his and dismissed decades of experience as non-agile. Edward didn't interrupt, didn't speak, but when I finished, he said, "Send me the paperwork. You'll have my vote." That same evening, I sat at my kitchen table with a calculator, a bottle of ginger ale, and a silence thick with satisfaction. 12% from the early batch, 15 from Judith, 5 more from Edward. Total, 32%. It was still short, but then Lena knocked. She had never once come to my apartment. We had worked together for 9 years, shared elevators, holiday cards, even an office birthday cake once, but never like this. She wore a deep green coat and carried a reusable tote bag. Her hair was damp from the snow. "I brought tea," she said, holding up a tin, chamomile. "I thought you might not sleep much these days." I let her in. She didn't ask questions. Instead, she sat across from me, took in the folders, the laptop, the legal printouts. "You're going to do it, aren't you?" she asked. "I'm trying. I can help." She pulled a small black planner from her bag and opened it to a bookmarked page. "These are the remaining Class B shareholders who've been ghosted by Brandon since Q2. I checked with finance. He didn't even send them the last growth update. If you reach out now, while they're still feeling ignored." I stared at her. "You've been keeping track." She shrugged. "Some of us remember who built the place." I didn't say thank you. I didn't need to. She already knew. Over the next week, with Lena's help, I reached out to 4 more shareholders. 2 of them had been waiting for anyone to ask for their voice. Another was grateful to finally offload his shares to someone with a spine. The last, a soft-spoken man named Charlie, who used to run HR, simply said, "Tell them I said hello when you take the floor." Their combined stake, 9%. My total now, 41%. It was done, and not a soul in the building suspected a thing. The Wednesday before Thanksgiving, Brandon hosted a company-wide party. There were balloons in the break room, turkey sliders, and sparkling cider in plastic flutes. Someone had printed out "Grateful for Growth" signs and taped them to the windows. I didn't attend. Instead, I printed a 1-page document. Title, "Notice of Special Shareholder Voting Authority." I slid it into a sealed envelope, addressed it to the board chair, and handed it to the receptionist with a smile. "This goes to Ms. Delacroix directly. Confidential." She nodded and placed it in the outgoing courier tray. On my way out, I passed Brandon in the lobby. He was surrounded by junior staff, telling some anecdote about investor dinners and future markets. He saw me, flashed a PR-grade grin, and lifted his cider. "Hope you're enjoying Gratitude Week," he said. "I am," I replied. "Very much." He turned back to his audience. already forgetting me. But I didn't forget him. He threw a holiday party. I prepared for the boardroom war. The meeting room smelled like new leather and arrogance. The quarterly board meeting was always scheduled the same way. Mid-December, 10 a.m. sharp. On the 25th floor, the one with the expensive glass table, imported water, and skyline views. Brandon insisted made stakeholders feel inspired. I arrived at 9:42, not early enough to look desperate, not late enough to seem passive. Lena was already there, clipboard in hand, stationed at the registration desk. Like the quiet gatekeeper she'd always been, she glanced at me, nodded, and handed me my credentials without a word. But her fingers lingered an extra second on the badge. "You good?" she asked. Very. Inside, the boardroom buzzed with curated confidence. PowerPoint decks on standby, catered pastries untouched, branding banners in crisp white and blue along the walls. Brandon stood near the screen, chatting with the head of strategy about next quarter's targets. I could hear words like momentum, growth vectors, and evolution. He didn't notice me. At 10:02, the meeting began. "Thank you all for being here," Brandon said, adjusting his jacket with that camera-ready ease. "It's been a phenomenal quarter. Our KPIs are trending up, client retention is solid, and our innovation initiatives are..." I tuned out, not because I wasn't listening, but because I already knew every word. He'd rehearsed this in the mirror, probably timed each slide with a clicker. He was a man talking to a room full of mirrors, expecting only reflections of himself. Then slide 9 came up. The same strategic model he'd stolen from me months ago, the one Diego had backed up, the one I'd created at 2 a.m. while Brandon was flying to a fintech conference in Miami. No attribution, no note, just his voice layering fluff over structure I had built with code, sweat, and zero recognition. When he rapped, there was polite applause, then a beat of silence. I stood. "Before we proceed to the vote of confidence," I said, loud enough for the whole room, "I'd like to invoke the right of a majority-minority bloc to present alternate governance." Heads turned. Even Lena looked startled. She hadn't known that line was coming. Brandon blinked. "I'm sorry, Eliza. This is not a general employee forum." "No," I said. "It's not. It's a shareholder forum. And I'm here as proxy and representative of 41% of this company's voting shares." The silence hit the room like ice water. Board Chairwoman Delacroix turned sharply in her seat. "Would you repeat that, Miss Monroe?" I stepped forward and handed her the sealed envelope I'd delivered before Thanksgiving. The formal notice was filed and timestamped 2 weeks ago, verified by corporate counsel. Per bylaws, a minority bloc exceeding 40% may call for a motion of no confidence if irregularities or gross misrepresentation of leadership performance are substantiated. Brandon laughed. It wasn't convincing. "You can't be serious." "I am," I replied. Delacroix opened the envelope. Her eyes scanned the paperwork. Slowly, thoroughly, her brow furrowed. "Everything here checks out," she said finally. "Do you wish to state your motion formally?" "Meh, Monroe." "I do," I said. I moved to initiate a vote of no confidence in Brandon Calloway as CEO, based on unethical misrepresentation of work, failure to retain senior talent, and erosion of shareholder trust. Someone gasped. Someone else whispered, "Oh my God!" Brandon turned red. "This is absurd. This is some kind of vendetta." "No," I said quietly. "This is accountability." He looked to the board members, faces he'd once charmed, persuaded, maybe even bought dinner for. They weren't smiling now. They were flipping pages, checking clauses, reading emails on their phones. One of them, a woman named Ellis, who'd never once looked in my direction during past meetings, raised her hand. "I second the motion," she said. And just like that, it was real. The chairwoman called for a vote. One by one, the hands went up. Not all, but enough. 5 minutes later, Brandon Calloway was no longer CEO. He sat in his chair, stunned, silent, a man who had always spoken too much, now at a loss for anything meaningful to say. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I simply turned to the board and said, "For the interim, I recommend Mrs. Lena Patel to oversee operations until a formal succession is decided." Delacroix raised an eyebrow. "Interesting choice. She's been running things already," I replied. "You just never noticed." Brandon stood up slowly. He didn't look at me. Instead, he looked around the room as if seeing it for the first time. "These people," he muttered, "they followed you." "No," I said. They remembered me. He left without shaking hands. I remained behind, collecting my papers, handing off folders, answering quiet nods with quieter ones. It was over, or rather, it had just begun. He looked at me like he'd just met me for the first time. He left without saying goodbye. I didn't need one. The Monday after the vote felt like waking up in a different company. The same desks, the same ding of the elevators, the same burnt smell from the shared toaster. But the air was clearer, lighter. Brandon's nameplate had vanished from the executive door, replaced by a blank brass plate that reflected my image faintly when I passed by. No one mentioned his name that morning. It wasn't forbidden, just unnecessary. The official memo came at 10:03. Meow. It didn't mention the vote, no statement of thanks, no legacy tribute, just a sterile line, effective immediately. Mr. Brandon Calloway will be stepping down from his position as CEO. Interim operations will be managed by Miss Lena Patel. People read it in silence, then reread it. At 10:08, I received a meeting invite from Lena. The subject line read, "One last coffee. Just us." Her new office still smelled like old cologne and cold ambition. She hadn't moved in yet. No framed degrees, no personal touches, only a small notebook and a plant she'd rescued from the break room. "You sure you don't want it?" she asked as I walked in. "The office." I smiled. "Or the job?" "Both." I shook my head. I've spent 20 years building things for people who didn't always deserve it. This time, I just wanted to take back what was mine, set it right, and step out before the spotlight found me. Lena leaned back. "What if we actually built something different this time? Then I'll be proud to have helped you start it." We sipped in silence. She looked exhausted, but also free. Before I left, I handed her a folder. "This is everything Brandon buried," I said. "Budgets, forecasts, risk reports he shelved to look good on paper. Use it how you want." Lena's fingers trembled slightly as she took it. Later that day, I walked past Diego's desk. He was surrounded by younger analysts, animatedly explaining something with hand gestures, and a whiteboard already half filled. He saw me and stopped mid-sentence. "Eliza," he said. "Wait just a second." He caught up to me by the stairwell. I just wanted to say thank you," he said, "for backing me up, and for what you did in that meeting." I smiled. "You're doing great. I still have that flash drive." "Good. You might need it one day." "Do you think they'll ever learn?" he asked. "People like Brandon." I paused. "Some do, most don't. But it only takes one person remembering the truth to stop the lie." That evening, I held a final roundtable with my old department, the risk team. I'd scheduled it quietly, without HR or pizza or PowerPoints, just a long table, a pot of black coffee, and the people who had walked beside me through every disaster, system bug, and CFO panic attack. "I'm stepping away," I told them, not disappearing, just choosing not to lead from the center anymore. They were quiet. Even the ones who had suspected it didn't quite know how to respond. I continued. "We've always been the first to see what's broken, and the last to be thanked when it's fixed. That's not going to change overnight, but what you can do is stop apologizing for being right too early." They nodded. One of them, Jenna, cleared her throat. "Will you still be around? If things go sideways, I'll always be around," I said, "just not in a corner office." I left the building just before sunset. The sky had opened into soft gold. Snow clung to tree limbs like breath held too long. I took the long way to the train, passing the cafe where Jeremy, the barista, already had my cup ready before I even walked in. He slid it across the counter with a grin. "Big week. You could say that, still holding the place together." I chuckled. "No, not anymore." I sat at the corner table, same spot as always. I watched people rush by with shopping bags and earbuds, and the kind of urgency that comes from trying to outrun winter. And for once, I didn't feel behind, or forgotten, or small. I felt done, not finished, just complete. Brandon had left without saying goodbye. That was fine. I hadn't done this for closure. I'd done it so the next woman who sat in that conference room wouldn't have to prove herself 3 times just to be believed once. The company could go on. Lena would lead. Diego would rise. And I would rest, maybe write again, maybe teach, maybe nothing. But whatever I did next, it would be on my terms. I rose from my seat, left a tip twice what I usually did, and stepped outside into the cold. I wasn't the loudest in the room. I was just the one who'd been listening all along. She didn't raise her voice. She raised the standard. In a world that celebrates noise, Eliza proved that quiet strength can move mountains. They dismissed her as too traditional, too experienced, and yet she was the one holding everything together. This isn't just a story about revenge. It's a reminder. Dignity doesn't mean staying silent forever. It means knowing when to speak and how to make that moment count. So next time you're overlooked, Don't just get bitter, get ready. Stay steady, pay attention, because when the time comes to be heard, let your truth leave the room in silence.